Thank you. Very good. So let's continue our story of what I learned from my grandma. So there she's a 20-year-old woman, relatively recently married. She has a baby, like a newborn. The war starts, it's crazy out there. As the years go by, 41, 42, 43, the front gets closer, civilian population gets evacuated from large cities because large cities become target for overnight bombing raids, and it's just crazy out there. So there's my grandma, who in the meantime has the second baby. So she now has a 3-year-old and a newborn, and she gets evacuated from capital city into a godforsaken little village in the middle of Slovakia, hoping that nobody will bother pulling their armies through godforsaken little villages, so civilians should be okay there. So my grandma, with these 2 babies, shows up in this village and is placed by civil authorities in a house of local residents. And local residents are asked to set aside one basement room for this young family, one woman with 2 children. Her husband, my grandpa, had to stay in the city and serve and stuff like that. So there she's with these 2 babies. Now, where does she get food for the kids? Well, she goes to a local superstore, right? Except this is 1940s Eastern Europe, guys. There ain't no superstores. There's no store in the town. Plus, it's war. Several years of war. There's absolutely nothing. So my grandma actually lucked out, because across the street from that house, there was a family that still had a cow that gave milk. And those people were nice enough to understand just how difficult life was for these evacuees. So every day, that family gave my grandma a cup of milk in the morning, cup of milk in the afternoon. She strained it, took out that extra fat, because you can't serve a newborn, full milk from a cow, right? It would be too fatty. So she knew how to do that. And she had this basically steady supply of fresh milk so she could actually feed the newborn. She lost milk, while being transported. So this is how she was making it. Now, bad luck hit, though, because there was one part of receding German Nazi armies that actually happened to be pulling through that village. And they set up a temporary command there and stayed there for several weeks. Now, what did those Nazi soldiers do once they settled at that village? They, of course, declared martial law, right? What does it mean, martial law? You basically can't, it's a curfew, right? You can't walk on the street, you can't, and it was 24 hours. For 1 week, there was a 24-hour curfew in place. Nobody was allowed to walk on the street, to walk outside. Everybody had to stay at home. The problem was, my grandma had to cross the street for the milk twice a day. Another problem was, there were checkpoints on each side of the street. For 1 week, my grandma had to cross the street twice a day and was shot at. And she survived, never got hit. She was 24 years old, 2 kids. And then she described to me, when finally Nazis moved out, the war was over, she returned back to the city. It was still post-war, it was still chaos. But families with kids got something like, food stamps. And they could go to distribution center and claim certain number of bottles of milk. So for 2 kids, she got 2 food stamps, showed up at that distribution center, and she was telling me, you have no idea how I cried when I went to that distribution center the first time. I gave them the 2 tickets, and they gave me 2 bottles of milk. And nobody was shooting at her. What was the last time anyone was shooting at you in Publix when you were buying a gallon of milk? Never. Now, if your baby's well-being depends on that gallon of milk, would you actually pay $6 for that $4 gallon of milk?
Yeah.
Would you pay $8?
Yeah.
Do you have to? No, because it was $4. What's the price of a gallon of milk now? Almost five? 4 to 5, right? Something like that. See, there you go. Would you be willing to pay more than $4 or $5 for a gallon of milk if you had to? You would actually be willing to put your life on line if that's what your baby's well-being depends on, right? But you don't have to because it's there for $4 or $5. So my question is, do you actually have some consumer surplus when you get yourself a $5 gallon of milk? Yes or no? Would you be willing to pay more than $5 if you had to? Do you have to? No. So you have consumer surplus. Every single time. How come you're not aware of it? Because we never think about it. You never ask yourself, what would I do if I lived in a country where a gallon of milk is $10? You never ask yourself, what would I do if I lived in a country where people would be shooting at me crossing the street to get a milk, right? You never ask yourself these things. You take $4 or $5 gallon of milk as a routine, boring chore. But the fact is, even when you're buying these routine, boring, everyday items, you are always reaping big consumer surplus. Okay? You don't realize it until you're really in some kind of an extreme situation. So the bottom line is, yes, consumer surplus is first of all very real. Those are real dollars. You are ready to spend, you don't have to, number one. Number two, you are generating consumer surplus even when you're buying ordinary everyday things. In other words, consumer surplus is a very powerful measure of consumer well-being in every single market. That's why we will be using it confidently and comfortably for the rest of the session. There's nothing theoretical about it, nothing hypothetical about it. It's a very real, very practical measure of consumer well-being. Okay? So that was the last theory story, at least for today. Now, without another big, funky-looking graph and more theory stories, would you be able to intuitively develop a corresponding measure of well-being for producers, for firms? If well-being of consumers is measured by consumer surplus, which is then measured as the area of the triangle below demand above the price, how would you go about measuring well-being of firms? How much firms benefit from participating in the market? Well, try brute intuition. If consumer surplus is measured as the area of a triangle above the price, below demand, then well-being of producers might be measured by what?
The supply.
What about supply?
Below supply?
Sit up.
Below supply?
Below supply.
Above.
Above supply. Above supply, below what?
Say above.
Above supply and below what?
Oh, below the equilibrium?
Below equilibrium price. Exactly. In other words, triangle below price, above supply would measure the well-being of producers. What would you call it? If well-being of consumers is measured by consumer surplus, well-being of producers should be measured by
Producer surplus.
producer surplus. Very good. Now, the two of you proposed dramatically different approach. Your colleague here suggested below supply. You're suggesting above supply. Why did I side with you? There's nothing personal. It's just why are we thinking of producer surplus as the area measured by the triangle above the supply, below the price? Here's why. Remember, supply is the quantity firms are willing and able to produce, right? In other words, at this price, this many products would be produced, right? But those firms that produce those products and would be willing to do so, even at such a low price, do they end up selling that quantity at such a low price? No, they end up selling it at the equilibrium price. In other words, the supply shows you the lowest price a firm is willing to accept in exchange for that good. But that firm willing to accept such a low price ends up selling at a high price. Imagine you are selling your used car. You think to yourself, gee, if only I sold it for $5,000, I would be happy. I really don't want to sell it for less. It's still got some life left in it, and so on. So you post an ad, and you think to yourself, well, to give me some negotiating room, let's ask for 7. Nobody's going to buy it for 7, but at least I can negotiate down, right? So you post an ad, 7,000. Suddenly, within a few minutes, somebody responds to your Craigslist ad and says, can I take a look at that car? And you say, yeah, absolutely. Within an hour, you have the first person interested, like, gee, my car just broke down, I'm quickly looking for something that runs well. And you say, well, try this one, it's got some life left in it. They take it for a spin. How much are you asking? Like, well, I'm asking 7. You know, it actually runs fantastic. Okay, I have cash, do you accept cash? And they give you 7,000. How do you feel about that? You were willing to accept 5, they told you, sorry, the best I have is 5, I don't have more on me, you would have accepted it. But they give you 7. Wow! What is that, 2,000? That's your producer or seller surplus, right? That's the difference between the least you were willing to accept and how much you actually got for it. So this is why that area of a triangle below the price, above the supply curve, represents the size of the producer surplus. So, let's take a look at this. Now, what is the size of producer surplus in this market in equilibrium? How tall is the triangle? 3. How wide is the triangle? 3. 3 times 3 is 9. Divided by 2? 4.5. $4.50. So, in this particular case, in this particular example, consumer and producer surplus are equal to each other. Is that something, is that a feature that will generalize into other examples? Are we always going to see producer and consumer surplus equal to each other? No. This is a special case because we have a very simple example. You will have many other examples on the homework where these two numbers are not going to be equal to each other. So what are we finding? We are finding that consumers are generating $4.50 in consumer surplus in equilibrium. Producers are generating $4.50 producer surplus in equilibrium. And now I'm going to ask, what about that same market with price ceiling? Do you think consumer and producer surplus will remain $4.50 for both of them, or will it change? In other words, do you think that price ceiling changes the well-being of consumers and producers? Oh, absolutely. So you see, now we're not going to ask just the question, does the well-being change? We're going to ask a question, how much? Okay? Quantitative question. So let me clean up. Let me clean up. Is this part of the board still functional? Very good. So, here we're going to ask, what is the consumer and producer surplus after price ceiling was imposed in the market? Let's start, okay, so we're asking consumer surplus, we're asking producer surplus. Now, we're going to ask, what's the consumer and producer surplus after the policy was imposed? We're going to call consumer surplus and producer surplus after the policy was imposed CS prime and PS prime, where prime means after, right? So it's basically before and after analysis, right? Before the policy in equilibrium, after the policy with price ceiling. For simplicity, let's start with producer surplus after the policy was imposed. How are you going to measure producer surplus? Here we measured producer surplus as the size of the triangle, area of the triangle below the price, above the supply. How are we going to measure it here with price ceiling?
Below the price.
Same way. Below the price, above the supply curve. Can you see a triangle below the price, above supply curve? Absolutely. How tall is that triangle?
1.
1. How wide is that triangle? 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Divided by 2 is 0.5. How big is the producer surplus? How much? 50 cents, guys. 50 cent producer surplus, right? What happened to producer surplus as a result of the policy? Drop. How much did the producer surplus drop?
$4.
$4. Producer surplus is now $4 smaller than it was in equilibrium. How do you think producers feel about that price ceiling? They don't like it. They hate it. They loathe it. How much do they hate it? To the tune of $4, right? Now we can actually put a number on it. Just how much worse off producers are. Because it reduced their well-being from $4.50 to mere 50 cents. Are you shocked? Are you shocked that producers hate price ceiling? No, that's something you knew all along, right? Because it depresses the price. If you're selling something and the government tells you you have to lower your price, you're like, ah, gosh, I hate that. What we did not know before is just how much worse off it makes you, right? But hey, producers are not the only people in this market. There's also consumers. Let's ask, how much are consumers benefiting? Because, guys, recall, what was the initial idea, or what was the initial purpose of that price ceiling? Why does the government ever consider price ceiling? To make who better off?
People.
Meaning consumers, right? The government imposes price ceiling not to make firms worse off, but to make consumers better off. So let's see if it actually makes consumers better off. So how would you measure consumer surplus in this market?
Top portion.
Top portion, right? Here, in equilibrium, consumer surplus was measured as the area of a triangle below the demand, above the price. So we should look at that here as well, right? Before we write anything, guys, let's think about it for a second. If we applied the same logic to this market now with price ceiling, we would measure consumer surplus as the area of a triangle above the price, $3, because that's the price now, right? $3. Below demand, correct? In other words, it would be area of this large triangle. Can you all see that large triangle? Okay. Question, is that really measuring the consumer surplus? You say no.
As the supply line cuts into it, it cuts it off at a certain...
That too. Let me tell you guys. Of course, that triangle, that large triangle, would measure consumer surplus. It would measure consumer surplus of 5 families renting cheap $3 apartment. Right? If 5 families can find $3 apartments, then their consumer surplus is going to be measured by that huge triangle. But my question is it really the case that when the government imposes a $3 price ceiling, 5 families can actually find $3 a pop apartment?
No.
Yes.
Would you have to subtract
Correct. No. Yes, you're saying?
Would you have to subtract the triangle to make
In other words, you're right. In other words, yes, this top triangle would measure consumer surplus if 5 families could actually buy for $3. But that's not the case. We know that in this market only how many apartments are being leased? One apartment. So only one family actually gets to enjoy that low price. So it's not the whole triangle that measures consumer surplus, it's only part of that triangle. Which part? Part of that triangle corresponding to this one family. In other words, not the whole triangle, just this part of it. Does it make sense? It's not the whole triangle, only this part of it, corresponding to the consumer surplus associated with consumption of that one unit. Okay? So, consumer surplus is now evaluated as the area of this, what is it? Piglet, right? Trapezoid. How do you calculate area of a trapezoid?
By the rectangle and a triangle.
Exactly. Yeah. No matter how you look at it, you just applied your method from your math classes. No matter how you approach it, which formula you use, you basically, in the end, split that trapezoid into 2 parts. The top little triangle and the bottom rectangle, right? And then you find the area of the triangle separately and rectangle separately. So please do it. Can you do it?
No.
Why not? What are we missing?
The price.
We're missing this number, right? This number on the vertical axis. Without that number, we don't know how tall the little triangle is. We can't find its area. So we have to first find this number. How are we going to find that number? Well, look at it. You basically observe it from that graph. It is a number on the price axis corresponding to a point on which curve? What curve is this? It's a demand curve. So, we have to find that missing number from the demand curve. Okay? And we're looking for a price number on the price axis. So we're asking, what is the price along the demand curve corresponding to what quantity? 1. So if the quantity is 1, what is the corresponding price? 8 minus 1 is 7. So this number here is 7. Now, the question of the size of consumer surplus boils down to a question. What's the area of the top triangle? How tall is it? 1 times 1 divided by 2 is 50 cents plus the area of the rectangle. How tall is the rectangle? 4. From 3 to 7 is 4 times 1. What's the area of a rectangle? 4. 4 times 1 is 4. What is the consumer surplus? 450. What is the impact of the policy on consumer surplus? No impact. Now, the policy obviously hurts producers, right? Producers hated the policy. Why did the government impose that policy? Was it to help the producers? No, it was to help the consumers. Do consumers actually benefit from the policy? In this particular example, producers do not benefit. Now, is this what you're always going to find? That consumers never benefit from the price ceiling? No, sometimes you're going to find that consumers actually do benefit. Sometimes you're going to find that consumers do not benefit. And sometimes you're going to find that consumers themselves are actually even worse off. What's going on, guys? Look, price was $5. Now price is $3. How come consumer surplus is not going up? The market is no longer in equilibrium. That's exactly the point. Price is no longer 5, price is now 3. How come consumers as a group are not better off?
Less group.
Because there were 3 consumers who enjoyed the product. Now there's only 1 consumer. Now that 1 consumer definitely benefits, right? That 1 consumer enjoys big consumer surplus. But there were 3 consumers before and 2 of them now can't buy because not enough is produced. So while 1 consumer is better off, 2 consumers are not buying. What happens to well-being? What happens to consumer surplus of those consumers who ultimately do not buy because the market doesn't produce it? Well, imagine you have your favorite energy bar, okay, that you always get yourself for $2 and you enjoy it. And suddenly the government declares, this energy bar is so popular with our students, it's outrageous to sell it for $2, it's only going to be $1. But at $1, the energy bar producer doesn't bother producing them. So now the price is $1, you see the sticker price $1, but there ain't no energy bars there. You come to the store, you want to grab your favorite energy bar, they're not there. How much consumer surplus are you deriving from seeing that sticker price $1 when there ain't no energy bar? You have no consumer surplus. You lose your consumer surplus that you used to have when you were buying for $2. Now that it's $1, but you can't buy, you don't have any consumer surplus. It's lost. So the bottom line is, the consumer who lucks out and buys at lower price has nice big consumer surplus, but the consumers who used to enjoy buying at equilibrium price and now cannot, they lose consumer surplus. Someone gains, someone loses consumer surplus. In this particular example, the net change is 0. Consumer surplus remains the same. Like I said, on the homework you will be crunching these numbers in various examples, and sometimes you will find that consumers really do benefit from price ceiling. Sometimes they don't, and sometimes they actually lose. Can you imagine a scenario in this market where price ceiling would literally kill consumers, not just producers? It would harm everybody totally.
$2.
Suppose the government imposes price ceiling at $2. How much are firms going to be producing?
None.
Nothing. How much are consumers going to be buying?
None.
Nothing. What's going to happen to consumer surplus? 0. Producer surplus? 0. Right? The market can simply wipe out all the surplus by simply wiping out the entire market. The government can shut down the market. If the government sets price ceiling too low, it can simply shut down the market. That makes sense? All right. Now, can something like that ever happen? Have you ever seen anything like that happen? No, because you live in a free market economy where most markets are somehow operating at or near equilibrium, even though there are still taxes, and you will see that those distort equilibrium, but those distortions are not severe enough to basically kill the markets. But there are countries where policies were so invasive, so pervasive, that the markets were literally knocked out. What kind of a system do you think is kind of synonymous with oppressive pervasive government intervention? Communism, yeah, right? Communism, relatively recent experience in Europe. 20-some years ago, there was still communism. Guys, back in the 70s, I mean, I lived under communism, but in the 70s, I actually visited Moscow. My dad worked there for half a year, and it was quite a surreal experience. A huge capital city, 8 million people, large streets, impressive buildings, and so on. We walked into a butcher shop, and I've never seen anything like that. There was a bored butcher sitting in front of completely empty shelves. There was absolutely nothing. Imagine a butcher shop without a single piece of nothing in it. Totally empty. Nothing there. So you see, policies, when imposed in a particularly egregious way, can totally kill the market. Now, if you show up in a store like that, and you see a low price somewhere on the sticker, today's special, beef, 50% off, but there ain't no beef there. How much do you benefit from that low price? You don't. It kills all the consumer surplus there is. Does it make sense? So, what have we, let's try and summarize. First of all, we found out that price ceiling hurts producers. Surprised? No, we knew that all along. Price ceiling that was designed to help consumers may or may not help consumers. In this particular case, it doesn't really help. It doesn't hurt, but it doesn't help. You will see, as you go through homework problems, you will see that the variety of those outcomes is quite large. Sometimes you will see consumers benefiting, sometimes not, sometimes consumers hurt. One thing that will keep repeating, though, is the following one. When you add up consumer and producer surplus, you add up consumer and producer surplus, you get what's called total surplus. What was the total surplus in this market when it was in equilibrium? $9. What is the total surplus in this market now that the policy has been imposed? $5. What happened to total surplus as a result of the policy? Total surplus decreased. Guys, every policy we will be studying in this class results in what? Decreased total surplus, reduced total surplus. Policy tends to reduce total surplus. How much did the total surplus decrease? By $4. We call that drop in total surplus the dead weight loss. Dead weight loss of the policy, in this case, $4. 9 minus 5 is 4. Yes, question.
So will the dead weight loss be the same as the deficit?
No. Those two numbers are only coincidentally equal to each other. They don't have to be one and the same. So, dead weight loss measures the drop in total surplus associated with the policy. As we explore more and more policies, and you will see how policies, different policies, reduce total surplus to different extent, you will start realizing that the drop in total surplus actually measures what we really, really are interested in. It measures the decrease in efficiency. Total surplus and its changes reflect changes in efficiency of the market. And as we proceed with our analysis, you will always find out that as soon as you knock the market out of the equilibrium, what happens? You incur dead weight loss. You cause inefficiency. In other words, a market cannot possibly generate bigger total surplus than it generates in equilibrium. In other words, equilibrium is a fish. And once you knock the market out of the equilibrium, once you distort equilibrium, you end up with inefficiencies. Now, before we go, let me just give you the following idea, and we'll develop and expand on it on Thursday. This is the first policy. On Thursday, within the first half of the class, we're going to go through another 2 or 3 policies. Yes, question?
What's the policy called?
This one, price ceiling. Price ceiling. We're going to go through another 2 or 3 policies. And we're going to be crunching numbers and playing with triangles and trapezoids, okay? And by the time we do it second or third time, you're going to be bored. Just give like, okay, and you're going to know exactly what's going to happen. Total surplus is going to go down, there's going to be deadweight loss, blah, blah, blah. And you're going to ask me, okay, how long are we going to be doing the same thing? How many times do we have to do it to drive that same point? So the question then arises, what is the point of studying several policies when we already know what all of them cause? Guys, the point of this analysis is not to show that most policies tend to decrease total surplus. That is a known fact. When you impose policies, you distort markets, you cause inefficiencies. We know that. Why do we have to analyze so many policies? To see just how much they distort equilibrium, to see just how much deadweight loss they cause. Because when you guys decide as citizens, guys, it's time to impose a policy that helps little old ladies in New York City, you will realize there are various policies you can use. One of them is price ceiling, rent control. Another is cash payment. Another one could be something else, right? There are various policies you can do, you can implement to help people. Some people would say, oh, we shouldn't use any policies. But many of you might feel, oh no, we are an empathetic nation, we want to help little old ladies in New York City. The question then arises, how are we going to do it? My question to you guys is, which policy would you pick? You know that all of them cause deadweight loss. But not all of them cause the same deadweight loss. Which policy would you choose?
We don't
The
know.
one that causes the smallest deadweight loss. The one that causes the least distortion, the least inefficiency. Does it make sense? Why is it important to impose policies that are least distortionary, that are least inefficient? So that you preserve efficiency of the American market, so that you preserve America as the wealthiest large nation on earth. Does it make sense? Mm-hmm. That's the purpose of the analysis. Thank you very much. Yes?